So you alluded to this before, and I really want to pause and unpack this a little bit. Um, well, actually, no, this is two questions, maybe. Maybe I shouldn't put the cart before the horse here. Um, why is the hero so popular?
I think a couple of reasons. One is they really are exceptional. And another reason is they're often situated halfway between people and the gods. So they're more relatable than somebody like Zeus would be. Um, so that's another reason. But I think they're popular now partly because the times are chaotic and people want heroes to save them during chaotic times. But also the US has a huge hero complex. We don't just value the hero, we're stuck to the hero. And so because we're unconscious of how all this plays out, we go around the world thinking we're heroes and we act like villains. So I think that's part of it too. It's a symptom of something that we need to outgrow.
And I've heard you say that before, that the US has a huge hero complex or an obsession or fixation on the hero. Um, I'm gonna unpack that more. First, I'm gonna say, well, how do you know that? As if,
Yeah.
anyone listening probably doesn't have an idea. What's the evidence for that?
Yeah.
And to push back on it a little bit, other, nations, other cultures, other, historical time periods, ancient or more modern, have heroic figures. Either
Yeah.
folk heroes or, revolutionary leaders, whether these were real people or, who knows, legends. So what makes the American take on the hero different?
I think the fact that we won't give it up.
Mm,
Like the British, think of all the British heroes. They set the pattern for us. So like King Arthur, the heroic figure, Lancelot, all those big British heroes, Celtic mythology, some Norse mixed in. And the cultures that revere heroes tend to be conquerors.
mm.
So the British eventually went, we should stop doing this.
Or be
Instead
more
of,
subtle about it.
yeah, yeah, at least act like we're going to stop doing it, right? And I think they disidentified with the hero a little bit, but we carried on. And what we revere, I mean, so evidence, right? So what we revere has heroic qualities, and it's a match to the stories, right? So, the person, usually male, but not always, who is a braggart, who comes on the scene and is aggressive as hell, and we would say toxic masculine. That's all unbridled hero stuff. That describes Percival to a T before he got initiated. He was like that. The first thing Heracles ever did in terms of his relationship to the feminine was he bit Hera's breast, which gave us the Milky Way galaxy. Everything's big with heroes, right?
Hmm.
So, and that big style, people go, Texas is big. Well, yeah, it's almost like a stand-in or an emblem for American psychology as a whole, right? And each part of the states exemplifies that. Like in New York City, the buildings are heroic. They're all tall, or a lot of them are, not all of them. But so we act out this pattern. And I think Joseph Campbell, who of course was an American, um, I think he was stuck to the hero. And when you're stuck to something archetypal, you all you see is everything in terms of the archetype. So at one point he's talking to Bill Moyers about, and Bill Moyers raises the question, well, what's heroic? And he goes, well, a baby giving birth is heroic, and a soldier going off to war is a heroic. And I'm watching this going, if everybody's heroic, nobody's a hero. So he only saw in terms of heroes. And I think too of the example of what's the first thing that happens when like somebody's walking down the street and they say there's gunfire, since that's one heroic thing we love to do, and somebody pulls somebody else down to keep them from being shot. Or in a more peaceful situation, you're in traffic and there's a car careening out of control and you grab somebody. I've actually done this and pull them out of the way at the last minute and the car misses both of you. First, if the press finds out about it, they're like, you're a hero. You're just a decent person. You're not a hero, not archetypally, not mythically. Any decent person will do that. So when we say it's heroic, we're separating that kind of behavior out from the social norm, which I think is destructive.
There is a lot going on in what you just said. So give me a moment because there's a lot of threads I could pick up there. Um, Gosh. One is this conflict between the hero and the everyman.
Yeah,
And I think there's a love affair with both of them, or we swing back and forth. And
we do. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because anyone could become a hero if the circumstances were right.
Right.
If your
Yeah.
adrenaline's pumping and your life is in danger and, you take a bullet for someone or lift a car off a baby or, get a cat out of a burning house or whatever, you
Yeah.
too be a hero.
Yeah.
And so but at the same time, labeling something that is either just human decency or your biological instinct and self-preservation taking over in that moment. You maybe didn't put a lot of conscious thought into it. Labeling that as heroism, I understand. We love that title. And hero is a very fun word to put into, a tagline or a soundbite or the title of, a news article.
Yeah.
Um, but then yes, yeah, if everyone's a hero, no one's a hero. Or if Yeah, I'm thinking about how that goes with this idea that a hero is larger than life, either in their personality or it's somebody who's otherwise unassuming who does something, very like a reluctant hero, like, Frodo or something. They answer the call to do something outside of, what they would normally do, and they find they have the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
Um, So it's hard to know what quite to make of this because whether you see the hero as positive or negative, or even if you're inclined to label it one over the other, take a step back. If you can't, I think, a lot of people don't like the to grapple with the complexity that it could be
Yeah.
either both, or outside of that label. Um, I think it's really I think it requires a lot more examination than most people are willing to undergo when it's so easy to just throw the word around.
Yeah. I
Um,
think we're educated, if that's even the word, to maybe conditioned is better, to not hold ambiguity, complexity, messiness. It has to be either good or bad, which is like a 10-year-old's way of thinking, right? So that the hero could be either, I think, baffles some people. But then when you produce actual examples like Gilgamesh, they go, oh, yeah, I get it.
and whether or not the hero is meant to be a role model, whether the
Yeah,
intention of the people who created the story, because the
yeah,
ancient writers of Gilgamesh, I imagine, were not like, this is how everyday people should act. And that's why we're telling you this story. I imagine a lot of early heroic tales are cautionary, and, is
yeah.
my perception.
That's
Um,
how it is with a lot of hero tales. I mean, we found the manuscript, or not manuscript, we found the writing of Gilgamesh in the library of a fallen empire.
mm,
And it was one of the only things that survived. And it seems to have been written as exactly that, cautionary. One of my favorite folk tales about heroism is a story that doesn't have a title. It's from Russia. And there's these two brothers named Ivan and Ivan. And they have different destinies, but they both are basically heroic conquerors. And one of them goes to a village and he's trying to sleep, and they knock on the door and they go, "The Tsar's daughter is about to be eaten by a sea monster." So like he armors up and he goes out there and he saves her, and after a terrific battle he kills the sea monster and brings her back to the Tsar, and then he's like, okay, now I can sleep. And then there's another knock. The Tsar's second daughter is now being threatened by, and this happens 3 times, and by the end of it he's like, can I sleep? So That's a side of heroism that sometimes doesn't get much press. We do like it when like James Bond goes through horrible things or whoever, Captain Kirk. We like that because it means they're tough, right? But like, what about when they fall apart afterwards?
It's a lot for a human to hold, like a regular
Yeah,
human that's not a demigod or given some special powers or something like
yeah.
that.
I've
Um,
I've worked with a lot of veterans, and I have students who are veterans. I come from military families, and they're one of the groups that I consider a lot of them to be genuine heroes, authentic heroes. And they're oftentimes the first people who don't like being labeled that. And I remember a Marine I was talking to about a situation he was involved with on the battlefield, and I was like, "You did that? You saved all those guys? That's magnificent." And he goes, "Well, what was the alternative?" Right? Stand there and do nothing while they get killed? I mean, so
but if you're one of the common folk, if you're not one of the Ivans, or if you're
yeah,
not
yeah.
doing, then
What
you're
if you're
waiting
the
for
sea
the
monster
hero.
and you hate the czar?
Mhm.
What if you're the sea monster and you hate the czar? I mean, that's the other thing. The heroes are always so hero supports the status quo,
Mm,
anti-hero changes the game. So Batman's out there making Gotham safe from the street criminals while the political criminals flourish, right? And
hmm
Gotham never changes.
hmm And that's I think you just said something that I was trying to formulate while you were talking about the Ivan story, which is yeah, there's always going to be another sea monster or damsel in distress or political figure that needs you to do something or some evil to vanquish. Um and if everyone's like, "Oh, call Ivan," or whoever, then yeah, if Ivan's the only one who can do it, what happens when Ivan is killed or Ivan is doing something else or and I think that's part of the a lot I think my from my understanding and also kind of my perception of pop culture and mass media, it's either people want to be the hero or they're
Yeah,
waiting for the hero. They're singing the song, "We're
right.
gonna need a hero." And I guess it's
Yeah,
not me. We need one.
yeah,
Somebody stand up, please. And it also perpetuates this myth that the monster or the villain is one entity that you can vanquish and cut you whatever the magical way is, the arrow through the
yeah,
heart or cut off its head and bury it, rather than something like political corruption, which is more like a hydra, a many-headed monster. You cut off one head and another grows. um
yeah,
but even in modern films or thing where the enemy is political corruption or patriarchy or they're trying to make some statement
yeah,
about the system, it's usually if it's a movie that has a happy ending people like and not a deeply unsettling one, it's constellated in one figure. The
yeah.
evil CEO or president or criminal mastermind. It's never like, well, yeah, we eliminate one and the bureaucratic machine is going to produce another. The machine is the
That's the sequel.
yeah. But again, we love the villains. We love,
Yeah,
Joker's gone. Now there's Penguin. Now there's this one, rather than, hey, how about we look at Gotham's political structure and the underworld and how the underworld is being fueled by the political structure. And maybe it's not just one politician, it's an entire mindset that creates, this and everyone's complacency in it. Because how do you defeat that in one fell swoop? That's
yeah,
generations of social change and education and trying and failing. And that's a very boring
yeah,
story most people are living and feel hopeless in. But it's a
yeah.
shiny story that can restore me hope that there'll be one exceptional person who will defeat these singular villains and then our problems are going to be solved. That's
Which
very
is,
attractive.
it is, and it's also infantilizing.
Mm,
It puts us straight into the child position, wishing for mom or dad to come and save us. It's the same psychology. There's some so science fiction writer David Brin and writers, I should say, David Brin and P.J. Manny and a bunch of others talk about this. And they're writing more and more fiction these days where there's not really a singular hero. There's a group of people who say to themselves, "We have to do something about this." So no, because no one's going to save us. And one of my favorite parts of the novel Dune, Children of Dune, was there's this guy called the preacher who comes in from the desert and he preaches kind of fire and brimstone style, but it's good stuff philosophically and psychologically to the city of Arakeen. So people come out and they listen to him at the edge of the city. And at one point, there's a rumor that he's the Mahdi, he's the Messiah, the Savior. So he's talking about the corruption of Arakeen government and the corruption of the empire. And this woman from the crowd, and by the way, he's blind too. So he comes in on it with a guide. He has his hand on the shoulder of a guide, and he
Very
preaches. So
mythic.
he's a yeah, he's a blind preacher. He's like Tiresias. And so when he's talking about all this, all of a sudden, a desperate woman in the crowd says something like, "Mahdi, save us." And although he can't see, he points a finger directly at her and says, "You are the only hope that remains." I love that. That's a great message. What are we going to do about this?
I think that's a road I'm not sure how far I want to go down because I have ambivalent feelings about the group as hero or the collective
Yeah.
hero. Are we just taking one archetype and multiplying it and then I think too, I'm not opposed to it on principle. I think the execution of it, whether in film or stories or TV shows, gets a little tricky. Uh, and I think a complaint that I've heard and I've had from a storytelling perspective is, isn't it so much easier to have one main character? Like, whose
Mhm.
story are we following here? And I'm not saying that's the right way to think, but I've learned it's a very hard thing to get out of. It's hard not to think that way,
Yeah.
to be invested in one protagonist. Um,
So my third novel in my Lamplighter trilogy is told from the perspective of a man named Kay. He's not a hero, although he's been through tremendous stuff, just absolutely tremendous. And he tells the story of a cultural transition. I don't want to give too much away, but he's in a circle of leaders who are fueling basically not just a revolution, but a revolution of culture and peace and other things that are happening internationally. And so the story has coherence, I think, because it's all from his perspective, including his blind spots. And there is a hero figure in the story who he looks up to, but they're actually a support person. They're making things happen behind the scenes, and you don't see them too much, so they are being heroic, but in kind of a quiet way. So I think it works that way. It's good to have maybe a single perspective or just a few, but we don't. That doesn't necessarily lock us into the hero as the main figure.
yeah. I'm just I'm not speaking specifically about your book because I haven't read that far into your series yet. Um, but you mentioned the word anti-hero earlier. Uh, and maybe we'll talk about this briefly before we take a little break. So I'm not the first person to ask this, but how are we not just repeating the hero and putting anti in front of it? Because the Joker becomes the anti-hero and now he has his own movies. And even
Yeah,
though we might look at this character as morally questionable and maybe not, you know, the good cop or the good or the moral hero or him or you could pick any number from movies or books where there's this morally questionable protagonist anti-hero, but we are charmed or if not charmed, then fascinated by them. And then suddenly I feel like we've just created another hero, someone who does something exceptional or someone who's
Yeah.
fighting some kind of system or ideology. You just find another person to root for in the same way that you were for the hero.
Yeah. I think part of the slipperiness is that they're part of the same archetype. So they go back and forth. In the really rich stories, they do that. I'm thinking of Philip Pullman's work, especially his Dark Materials, where the villains fight each other. It's basically two villains who save the day at the end of the trilogy. And the heroic figure does do a lot of interesting things. She's brave and she has a lot of characteristics of the classic hero. But it's slippery, and I think the anti-hero acts out what the hero wants to act out but
Mm.
never does. I think that's a big thing for them. So one of my favorite anti-heroes is from Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber. I grew up reading him. And so Corwin of Amber is somebody who is definitely an anti-hero at first. And the more you get to know about him, the more you're like, wow, this guy's really dark. I mean, he's lethal. He kills people. Um, he doesn't seem to have much of a conscience. And part of what the first 5 books are about are the fact that he's starting to get one. So there are situations where he doesn't kill somebody or he actually heals somebody, helps somebody. And afterwards, he's like, am I getting soft? You know? So for me, part of what's interesting is to see the hero and the anti-hero and the anti-hero in the hero, like Luke Skywalker attacking his father, defending himself against his father. And at one point, he lifts that skeletal hand and looks at it, and you can tell that it reminds him of the darkness of his father. And I think that's the moment where Luke realizes my anti-hero father is also inside me.
And that's a point that I've come across in depth psychology in your work and others' work, and that I'm trying again to grapple with is that any number of these characters are all reflections of capacities within us. And
Yeah,
when we think that we are following any specific, archetype or mold, of or certain way of being, that's just one possibility that's available to us. And the thing that we think we're not doing is the thing that we better look at the hardest because it means that we're repressing it and it's either going to conveniently come out in someone else that we can demonize. We'll
yeah,
we'll find that villain. We'll create that monster or it'll come into
yeah,
our light. If we're so set aside being the hero, the monster will appear.
yep.
Um, and how to, you know, explore these sides or recognize these sides of ourselves without necessarily, I don't know, what does a person, I think that's a big leap to for someone to open up their mind that they're not just the hero, they're the villain, they're the victim,
Yeah.
they're the unassuming crowd that needs to be saved, that all of these, are in them.
I think in order to do that, to access that, we have to put aside some of our American innocence,
Mm.
which is our natural, habit of mind. James Hillman makes kind of a funny and penetrating comment about that somewhere where he's talking about the old American woman on the frontier who, the Hollywood cowboys are shooting up the town and she's wringing her hands like, I never expected any of this. And Hillman's like, you're part of the problem. You're why it's happening, you know?
It's another way of saying it. You are part of the problem too, whether you're the hero or the victim.
Yep.
If you're the villain, at least you know you're part of it. Well, maybe the villain doesn't think they're part of the problem. The villain thinks they're the hero in a lot of cases. Again, hero is
Yeah.
a matter of perspective. Um,
Yeah. Sometimes they do. I think of Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, where the underground man at one point says he starts by saying I'm a spiteful man, and then he's ripping on people and institutions, and he goes, I lied when I said I was a spiteful man. I lied out of spite. So there's that.
so I think we're at a good place to pause for now, and we're gonna pick up this conversation in another episode shortly. So thank you, Craig.